Hello and welcome to another vibrant edition of A Splash of Paint with me, Matthew Palmer. In today's programme we'll be taking a closer look at some of the simple ways to inspire your artistic passion and encourage you to try something new. So switch on your creativity, it's time for 60 minutes of all the latest tips and advice from some of the most popular leading artists. Let's get started and take a look at what's on today's palette. Popular pencil magician Malcolm Cudmore will join us to demonstrate how a few simple effective marks can express what you see and encourage everybody to believe that they have the talent to draw. We'll be showcasing the work of experienced and versatile acrylic artist Chipp in our regular Introducing feature. And stepping into our Art Bite archive to see how watercolour artist Marilyn Alice uses a loose and impressionistic style to capture the movement of a lady in white. But before all that, I'm going to show you how to mix colours and more importantly show you how to mix primary colours together and have a go at painting a very basic quick seascape. So I've got 3 colours squirted in my palette, and the colours what I'm actually using for this particular one is a red, yellow and blue. These are primary colours, and in theory you can mix any colour from those. So we've got some French ultramarine blue, we've got some red which is alizarin crimson, and we've got a yellow, a dark yellow called yellow ochre, and that is 3 primary colours. Everything in life contains those 3 colours. You can mix them together and pretty much mix any colour you like from them. And a good example of this would be to paint a very quick seascape. So if I just use a large brush, a size 20, and I'll wet the paper, I'll do a bit of a wetting to wet sky for this one. I'll make sure it's all covered. Doesn't matter which direction you go, as long as the whole piece of paper is nice and covered. And if we look down the edge, we can see the bits we've missed. I'll do a very pale yellow ochre. I can take it straight from the blob. And then I'm just going to add a bit of a upward kind of streak to this, as though you're conducting an orchestra. And then when you come down past that pencil line, which will be the sea, I'll change direction. So that is a very light colour. It's just a nice background for a sky. Clean my brush. And then use blue by itself, and then if we put the blue at the top, we've got a bit of rain there, so it's a nice British seascape, and we'll bring it down, and you can see that French ultramarine works quite nice for the actual sky. I'll come right down to the bottom and do the water as well. Just do horizontal brush strokes for this and just move it upwards. You can see how quick I'm working there until it kind of fades away to the distance. So far we've not mixed any colours, but we've given a nice background. But what you might start to notice is on the paper where the blue and the yellow start to connect, we are starting to get a bit of a transition where it goes kind of like a grey colour. Let's start to mix a few colours, folks. What we're going to do is use a smaller brush, a size 10 or 12, and I'm going to mix up the most important colour of any painting, watercolour more so, and that's grey. And we'll start off by doing this quite thick, so a little bit of water goes into the mixing area. Nice thick blue. I'm going to put a tiny bit of crimson with it until we're getting a little bit of a purple tinge coming through. So already we're given a new colour to mix. You can see a slight purple cast of that. If you then bring in some of the yellow ochre and mix it with the purple, the colour starts to go grey. Add tiny amounts of this. And this grey is essential. You can see the grey just there. That grey is so important because that is a key colour or a shadow colour. In fact, if I just water that down, you can see how it's a nice pale shadow. So that colour would go over the top of anything, a building, a tree, even a stormy grey cloud. And we can just very lightly, because the paper's damp, creep in a bit of a grey cloud there in the sky, a crafty grey cloud, and just feather it away. But the main use for this is using a size 6 brush and making sure the colour's strong enough, and I'm going to paint in a bit of a distant cliff there. And of course the paper's slightly damp, we get a nice soft edge. It's called bleeding paint. It spreads into the sky. And then we can bring this down, and I can just paint in this nice clean edge all the way across, and you can see the sort of distant sort of cliff coming through there, and we'll just bring that across until it fades nicely away at the end, and you can see how it just disappears off. If I squeeze the brush through my fingers, lay it flat, and I can just wipe away. Can you see how the brush is flat to the paper? You can actually wipe away a few highlights, and if one part is lighter like this, the piece at the back goes further away. And then we'll just bring that down there as well. Just add a couple of highlights to this. And then using some yellow ochre, mixed with a bit of the grey, so put some of the grey with it, and we get a darker sort of sandy beach colour, as you can see there. And of course that would be great on this picture, just in this foreground area, just to sweep in that little tiny bit of a sort of beach coming in. And you can see how the water laps up to this. It's the way that you flick the brush. Smaller brush, back to the grey, and we can just add a couple of little flicks going out into the water to represent a couple of waves or little bits and bobs misting through. And a very quick and simple picture, but the main thing is it shows you how to mix colours, mix all three colours together, and you get the most important colour, which is the one for shadows. Now it's time to sit back as we join professional pencil artist and tutor Malcolm Cudmore as he works his magic with graphite to demonstrate how his top tips and techniques can remove the fear associated with drawing and help you sketch that farmyard favourite, a cow.
Hello, today I'm going to be doing a bit of drawing and sketching just using regular graphite pencils on paper. There's nothing I enjoy more than just going out with a sketchbook and a pencil, and even if I can't work from a live subject, I'd like to set up, even in the studio, drawing if I'm working from a photograph, so that it's sort of a bit like looking at the real thing. Here we've got this rather nice cow in a field. It's actually a photograph taken just outside my front door, as it happens, and I'm looking at the subject. I know it's a cow, but I'm not too bothered about the cowness of it just yet. I'm just looking at the simplest shapes I can find. And in the first instance, I'm looking for something that will enclose the whole thing. And having my subject quite close to my drawing surface means that it's very easy to make comparisons between what I'm looking at and my drawing at the same time, which means that I can quite easily see where things are going wrong. If I've got my subject a long way from my drawing board, it's quite difficult. So in the very first instance, I'm looking at straight lines. It's quite easy to adjust a straight line, much easier than altering a complicated curve. And I think that's like a little box that encloses everything. Now, what's a cow? Well, a cow, a fairly complex mechanical thing, but I could sort of look at it as if it was a box on four legs. So I'm going to need to know in a bit what the light's doing on this object. This cow. So in the first instance, I'm just going to look at it in its simplest form, and there we go. It looks like a box. I know it's more complicated than that, but it looks like a box on four legs, and the legs aren't exactly in the corners. Each leg I could consider as if it was a sort of almost a cone shape. Looking for some general angles to guide me at the moment. All these extraneous little bits of line and mark here, I can always rub those out later on, so I never worry too much about my workings, as it were. It's a bit like calculating sums at school. Always show your workings. So if I thought of it as a sort of a long rectangular box on legs at each corner with a sort of a squared off cone for a neck, and I suppose you could look at its head, which is a little bit like a box here, with a sort of cone shape at the end. I'm beginning to, his head's a bit big, so I need to adjust that. So there we go. You get some of the principal shapes in, but it's got a big swell where its stomach and sort of belly and internal bits and pieces are. So if I think about there being a sphere in the middle of that, that's going to help me understand what the light's doing and how it's reacting to the light. And at this moment, I know it's a black and white, essentially my brain tells me it's a black and white animal, but I've already noticed that some of the white is in shadow and it's quite dark, but some of the black is in the light, which means it's quite light, and probably even the lightest black is probably lighter than the darkest white, if that makes any sense. So these things I'm just paying a bit of attention to, and as we get on, I'm going to be refining the shape a little bit. If I'm happy that everything is roughly in the right place, I can begin to think about just refining the shape, positioning, the legs. That leg needs to go a bit further forward, doesn't it? Because it's a bit wider at the back. So as I say, I'm not worried at all about my markings or my initial lines here. There's a bit of a tail at the back there, here somewhere. So now I can start to think about the actual shapes within this. Cows they've got very bony backs, haven't they? Some of these shapes here I'm going to emphasize a little bit. And because I'm already thinking of it as a sort of fairly simple, solid object, I can begin to already understand what's likely to be happening to the light when it falls on this subject. So, for example, the light essentially looks as if it's coming from behind it. So a great deal of the side of the cow is going to be in shade compared to the top surfaces. And I'm going to start looking for some clear shadows in a minute. For example, I notice already there's a nice one here that really tells me that what's underneath the cow's udder is a kind of rounded object against something which is sort of almost screening it and causing a shadow to fall on it. Not worrying about any of the details yet. Might be useful to know roughly where its eyes are, probably about here. And they have a sort of forehead, don't they, cows, which is quite nice. That's very much in the light here. In the end, I'm going to need to get rid of all my working marks. And I'm going to think about what's essentially happening to the light on this subject long before I worry about its specific markings. Because if I start worrying now about the random black and white pattern that's on the cow, I'm probably going to get really confused looking at my shadows. Okay, I'm not going to bother too much with any detail on the feet because I'm going to simply indicate that they are partly obscured by the grass in which the field that the cow is currently grazing. As I say, I'm very familiar with this, not this particular cow, because there's about 40 of them that live in the field outside my front door. Okay, so this is a box again. I know that all the back side of this box is going to be covered in some kind of value. Beginning to really refine things now a little bit, yeah? So I'm quite happy now that the shape essentially looks cowish, if that makes any sense. Let's begin to look at, I'm sure there's a technical name for that bit of a cow, but I don't know what it is. Perhaps it's its heel or something, or it's like a elbow. Here we go, and at the back here as well. Well, I'm getting fairly comfortable now with the overall shape of everything, and I think what I'm trying to do is more, I'm not going to follow its exact pattern, and nobody's really, this is not a commission, this farm isn't asking me to do a picture of this particular cow, so therefore I'm not going to be terribly bothered about how accurately I cover the, or express the pattern here with pencil. At the moment I'm just using, by the way, an HB pencil. An HB pencil and a 2B pencil are with me at all times, wherever I go with my little sketchbook. HB pencil is hard enough to be able to make a good mark, but not too hard as to make too much of an impression on the paper if I want to erase anything. Now, in a minute, I'm going to be starting to render in some tonal values on the cow, so to make it look a little more three-dimensional. And this is when seeing it as a box or a sphere or a collection of very simple shapes is really going to help me out, because from experience I have quite a clear idea about exactly how light works on such objects. So I know that most of the back of this, or the side that's facing us, is going to be in shadow. However, I've got these deep shadows underneath here. There are shadows in here that help me to see that they're rounded objects. Just refine this a bit. Now, I'm going to get a rubber out just to tidy up some of these edges now and get rid of some of the working marks. Having used the simplest shape possible in the first instance, that's just helped me to map in everything so that everything is pretty well in the right place. It's perhaps a little wide here. Simplify these lines here. Now, I'm going to leave some of these working marks in here, This is just, by the way, a regular hard eraser. I've actually cut it up with a Stanley knife so that I've got a nice sharp edge on it, which helps me to control where it goes. I don't always have the luxury of a dusting brush, but as I'm in a studio I do. I never carry one with me. It's quite nice to be able to dust off any bits and pieces. So I'm now going to look for essentially the shadow shapes. Now this is part of what defines a cow, is these sort of really bony bits at the back here. And the fact that the shadows are there, they tell us a lot about the shape of the beast that's underneath. So I'm going to look for those, a sort of line where almost the cow is turning away from the light into the shadow side, which is on our side. It sort of fringes the neck here. I know I'm drawing it in as almost a clear line at this stage, but that's just going to help to guide me when I'm filling in my values. Let's just make sure I've got this eye in the right place. And there we go. So everything's roughly in the right place, and I'm going to commence with knocking in some general tone, and that's going to take a little while, and I'm doing it very loosely with this pencil. I'm still using the HB pencil at the moment. In a moment, when I probably will start looking a little darker, don't forget everything on this side of the cow is in some form of shadow. I'm not bothering about making really tidy marks at this point. This leg, however, is both in shadow from the general sort of light direction, but it's also in the shadow of the rest of the cow's body, as is this part of the leg here. And I'm going to carry on for a bit now, just breaking in a bit of tone here, which I can move around in a moment with a paper stump that you'll see me using, just so that I know where my principal values are. Everything that's at least in shadow needs at least, it's a bit like a wash. If I was doing a watercolour painting, I'd want to put in a little wash of some shadow just to help me to express the fact that this is a three-dimensional object that I'm trying to represent in 2 dimensions. Okay, so when I come back to this, I shall be starting to really look at the tones, and only when I've sorted out the basic tones that work and help define this as a three-dimensional object, that's when I'll start to worry about the actual markings.
Fantastic encouragement there, Malcolm, and brilliant results. We'll see a little more from Malcolm a little later in today's programme as he finishes that amazing work of art. But now it's time for a quick break, but join us in part 2, where we'll introduce versatile acrylic landscape and environment artist Chipp. We'll see you soon.